Ancient Greece's contribution to Western society, and really global culture, is nothing short of a miracle. The Greek lands had a lot of wisdom, but boy oh boy, did they have some crazy ideas. You know what they say about insanity and genius. These mighty fine lads were mighty fucking mad. That friend of yours that says the most profound shit when he's high, and then proceeds to shit in the middle of the living room, he quite possibly has some Greek DNA. It's even more probable if that friend of yours is named Diogenes. Many people have been interrupted mid-sentence, but few have been killed mid-sentence, like Thucydides, the ancient Greek historian. But we're not exactly sure how Thucydides died. That is going to be a running theme throughout this video. Ancient history is muddled at best and mythologized at worst. Take Charondas, a pupil of the mythical Pythagoras, who had decreed that no weapons be brought into the ecclesia. One day he forgot about a knife on his belt when rallying folks against a gang. And you know what happens next. He went to the assembly. To demonstrate the finality of his own laws, he committed suicide. Or Heraclitus, who thought himself ill, covered himself in honey, only to be eaten by dogs. No, you are not alone. These tales are as absurd as they sound. Speaking of absurdity, we'll also be muddling. Well, what we can. We're making a list, hence we'll be moving chronologically backward. Why? So that people who jump in the middle of the video think we don't understand the dates in BCE go the opposite way. When they try being pedantic in the comments, they get owned. Clever? I think so. And after all, history is messy. Why not mess it back up? See how it likes that. In any case, sit back, relax, and let the theater of absurd play out. Chrysippus, 206 BCE. Let's start with the oldest, wink wink, tale of the lot, and from there we'll move on to fresher pastures. Bernard le Bouvier deFontanelle was an 18th century French philosopher. What the heck? Those Frenchies are not Greeks as far as I know. And as far as I know, good sirs and madams, you are indeed correct in your assertion that Frenchies are not Greeks. However, I've merely named this odd-sounding fella because of something he said. Responding to an interview about laughter, he claimed he had never made ha-ha. Contrast this with Chrysippus, the Greek Stoic philosopher, who did make ha-ha, and what a brouhaha that caused. Zeno of Citium laid the foundation for the Stoic school in Athens and became its first head. He was followed by Clynthes and then Chrysippus. While inwardly Stoic, Chrysippus was outwardly not Stoic. He liked to party, techno beats and all that underground scene. In our particular tale, he was 73 years of age and inebriated at a party, eliciting mumbles like, "Grandpa be tipsy as hell, bro." Then he saw, believe it or not, a donkey eating a fig, and he freaked out. He went berserk with laughter. "Don't you guys see this? This shit be bussin'," he told his TikTok compatriots. In his very much unstoic demeanor, he further suggested to give the donkey a drink of pure wine to wash down the figs. Whether or not he was imitating Jerry Seinfeld is unknown to this day. Then, all of a sudden, he dropped dead and was forever remembered as the guy who laughed himself to death. That is until your mama came along. Philotas of Kos, 285 BCE. The pedant to beat all pedants to death, I should add. Philotas is to grammar Nazis what Plato is to philosophers, or to make it a more accurate analogy, what Hitler is to Nazis. Philotas of Kos was an ancient Greek scholar and a poet who made his name in Alexandria. One of Alexander's generals, Ptolemy I, consolidated power in Egypt and founded the Ptolemaic dynasty. When he captured Philotas' hometown, he ordered him to tutor his son. And what do you think his son's name was? One answer could be, who gives a fuck? And that would be a truly spectacular answer, worthy of an A+ grade. But we're going to play a game of Guess Who. Here's your hint. What is the name of Harry Potter's son? You've probably got it now. Ptolemy I's son was called Ptolemy II. Just like Harry Potter's son is called Harry Potter II, the Chamber of Secrets. The most exciting part, however, is that none of this is relevant, just like your existence. The deal did not include Philotas tutoring the prisoner of Azkaban, so he returned to Kos. Here he established himself as a behemoth of poetry and wisdom, but he wasn't wise enough to let things go. He would have learned a thing or two from the Stoics, but then we just saw what the Stoics got down to. So he was left to his devices, as all men should be when they're playing PlayStation. Like the sunlight-deprived zombies who stream on Twitch for days, he got lost in his work. What was his obsession, you may ask? Well, this dude wanted to correct all fallacies in other people's arguments. He wrote treatises on why a word or phrase was grammatically wrong. And so it happened that he once got so caught up in someone's innocent mistake that he began researching and writing an essay on it. Imagine being on the other end of that. Let's say you break up with your partner, and then someone writes an essay on your plight, and this someone isn't you or your partner. Pro tip: you don't have to worry about all this happening if you don't have a partner in the first place. Stay frosty, nerds and virgins. If by some mistake or another you do have a partner, keep them away from Philotas, the guy starved in his room while reading and writing about people's mistakes. Talk about being toxic. Anaxius, 320 BCE. Since we have discussed Ptolemy, let us also discuss Nicocreon of Cyprus. When Alexander's conquest started, he gave in without violence because, well, he was no pacifist, so it must have been an act of pragmatism. When he went to Alexander's court for tribute, he distinguished himself by how he carried himself. All went well, except for one little jab. Anaxius, a skeptic philosopher, said to Alexander, "Everything, O king, is magnificent. There is only one thing lacking, that the head of some satrap should be served up at table." The satrap was a dig at Nicocreon: play stupid games, win stupid prizes, and Anaxius was about to learn the complexities of this adage the hard way. After Alexander's death, Nicocreon fell into Ptolemy's good graces, and Anaxius, with his wise guy remarks, did not attract many well-wishers. And so, Anaxius found himself in Cyprus against his wishes, where the king still held a grudge over a joke. It was the Will Smith and Chris Rock saga of ancient Greece, except that Nicocreon did not just slap the shit out of Anaxius. The skeptic would have been grateful if that was all that befell him. The king had the jester, philosopher, ground with a large mortar and pestle, but Anaxius kept mouthing off. According to Diogenes Laertius, not Diogenes the cynic, mind you, he said, "Pound on. Anaxius is self long since is housed with Zeus, and after she has drawn you upon her carding combs a little while, Persephone will utter words like these: 'Out upon thee, villainous miller!'" The king, fed up with the mouthy bastard, ordered his tongue cut. At this, Anaxius bit his own tongue and spat it at the king. Being a tyrant must be so exhausting. One can almost sympathize. Almost. Philip II, 336 BCE, of Macedonia, not Spain. This bad boy had a knack for military organizations. Macedonia was a little brother to the larger Greek cities, but Philip came out of nowhere like an Uno reverse card. He issued a proper military as opposed to the de facto reserve. He trained highly efficient cavalry units and taught his troops to maneuver exceptionally in the heat of battle, the notorious hammer and anvil, and yet his grand ambitions of major conquests were cut short in marvelous fashion. One of his bodyguards, Pausanias of Orestis, had a dispute with one of the king's in-laws. Said in-law got the bodyguard drunk and had his attendants gang rape him. Easy peasy, lemon squeezy. Who wants to go through all that red tape? The bodyguard went to King Philip, who, surprise surprise, did not do anything. The king thought the matter resolved, but the guard returned, grabbed the mic and said, "Surprise, surprise, the king is back." Well, metaphorically. He said that metaphorically, with his actions like. The king was at the wedding of his daughter with his fourth wife. No, this is not a Bollywood saga. When the king made his walk to the event, the bodyguard stabbed him for not taking his side in a gang rape case. It's starting to sound more and more like the plot of a Bollywood movie. The assassin's horse tripped over a vine as he was escaping, succumbing to death in an anticlimactic turn unworthy of Bollywood. Sophocles, circa 405 BCE. Sophocles was one of the greatest playwrights of ancient Greece, a tragedian unlike any other. But in a twist of irony, his death was comical? There are several legends about the death of Sophocles, and each of them is more untragic than the next. For us anyway. According to the most famous description, he died while reading a lengthy line in his, frankly, exceptional play, Antigone. He kept reciting in a single breath without pause and suffocated. Imagine going to watch a tragic play, and you're treated to an actual tragedy. How tragic. Two more legends of his death are somewhat tangential to this scene. In one account of his death, he was so excited at the news of his play's success that he couldn't breathe. In another, he choked on a grape. Maybe not as exhilarating as his other deaths, but just as comical. Empedocles, 434 BCE. Let's talk about one of the most famous pre-Socratic philosophers, Empedocles. For his time, his ideas were revolutionary, but now he just seems like a cheap knockoff of Avatar, the Last Airbender. He thought life comprised four essential elements: fire, water, air, and earth. Pre-Socratic philosophers had played around with these ideas before. Thales believed that everything had been made from water, Anaximenes replaced water with air, and then Heraclitus claimed fire to be the source of all life. Empedocles threw them all together, added earth into the mix, and voila! Look at me, I'm a philosopher. Nothing could come into being, and everything was the result of the combination of his four roots. He also noted that love and strife were the key ingredients that affected the harmony and variation of the roots. To top off his doctrine, he proclaimed himself God. Having healed a few people and predicted some disasters, he believed himself to be the second coming of Jesus. But little did he know that the chronology was off. And so to prove his divinity to the masses, he led them to the top of a volcano, Mount Etna. He jumped headfirst into a volcano to immortalize himself as a god. We do not know if he morphed into a god, but the volcano did throw one of his sandals back up. I guess even nature can't swallow that much bullshit. Escalus, circa 456 BCE. Another great dramatist of ancient Greece, Escalus is called the father of tragedy. Before Escalus, the theatre was quite simple, even though hobos would insist on throwing around phrases like the fourth wall and meta. A narrator stood on the stage and narrated the story. During intervals, there would be a song and dance. So it was a combination of stand-up show and Indian Idol. According to Valerius Maximus, a Latin author and historian from the 1st century, Escalus had received a prophecy that a falling object would be his ultimate demise. So he usually stayed outdoors to avoid any interference from above. But little did he know that the exteriors would help him establish a direct connection to the heavens. No hindrance, no bad signal, just clear departure. Not to mention the dude was bald. You cannot get a better antenna to the gods. One day an eagle with a tortoise in his talons passed him. Upon catching a glimpse of that shiny dome, which he thought was a rock, he did a retake. How Valerius knew that was going through the eagle's mind is beyond the intellectual prowess of this narrator. He threw the tortoise down to break its shell and ended up breaking poor Escalus. There is another tale about the ancient Greek comic Antiphanes, not to be confused with Aristophanes, who made fun of Socrates. Antiphanes died after being struck by a spear? No. Rock? No. Lightning? Tortoise? No. Pear? No. Oh, sorry, yes, pear. He died after a fricking pear struck him. Snowflake. Zeuxis, 464 BCE. Pliny writes in his Natural History that Zeuxis' picture of grapes was so successfully represented that birds flew up to it. We would have called Pliny on his horseshit, but fortunately for him and unfortunately for us, most of the antiquities art has not survived. Zeuxis was one of the foremost painters of his time and is remembered for using light and shadows to create perspective. His predecessors, most notably Apollodorus of Athens, had employed the technique, but Zeuxis perfected it. These ideas, of course, left the Renaissance artists wet. He made the grapes, as opposed to an image of grapes, or so Pliny would have us think, when he was pitted in competition against a rival artist, Parrhasius. When Zeuxis went to take the cover off his rival's painting, he realized that the cover was part of the painting, so he said, "I've deceived the birds, but Parrhasius has deceived Zeuxis." But let's leave the anecdote alone for a moment and talk about his death. One day, he received a commission to paint Aphrodite, the Greek goddess of love, fertility and beauty. However, there was a catch. The patroness, a scraggly old woman, wanted to pose as the model. This, of course, was too much for Zeuxis, but he held his own. Unfortunately, he was a slow painter, and the long process of painting the old hag distanced him from the initial impulse. One day, he looked at his portrait, a hideous old bag of bones, and made a comparison with Aphrodite, and began laughing uncontrollably. He fell to the floor in a hysterical episode and kicked the bucket. A somewhat similar fate befell Calchas, a mythological character in Homer, who laughed at a fellow foreteller's prophecy. The rival soothsayer had told him that he would never drink wine produced from his newly planted grape farm. When Calchas finally had the wine prepared, he brought the prophesizer along to mock his stupidity. And boy did he mock. Before sitting down to share some wine, Calchas laughed in his face until blue. Draco of Athens, 7th century BCE. Draco was a lawman in ancient Greece, and yes, the word draconian refers to him. As you might have guessed, his laws were a teeny tiny bit harsh. The poor hated him, the rich loved him. In fact, they loved him so much that in a show of appreciation and applause, they showered him with gifts. They threw enough hats, shirts, and cloaks to smother and suffocate Draco under their wholesome barrage. Never has there ever been a more pompous death.